the recorded events section. At this point, I'll introduce our two experts who will be presenting today. We have Melody Bunting, our Training and Career Development Manager, and Kate Serby, a Senior Manager in our Accounting Solutions Group. Kate, I'll turn things over to you.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. And thank you everybody for joining us. Just a reminder for anybody that had originally signed up for our Restaurant Revitalization Fund webinar that was scheduled for yesterday. We did cancel it due to the fact that the SBA has not issued any additional guidance. We did cover a little bit of information in our webinar on March 22nd. So you can revisit that webinar to get information, the information that's available on the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and keep an eye out on your email. We will reschedule probably a longer Restaurant Revitalization Fund webinar once more guidance comes out. But today we're talking about the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. So we're going to talk about the loan program, the grant program, if you're eligible, what you can be doing now, and just some things to know. So with that, just a few stats. These numbers are from SBA.gov, and the most recent numbers are as of February 16th. So they're a little bit behind in updating some of the information, but it's going to give you some insight into how important these programs have been over this last year. So for the loan program, over 3.7 million loans have been issued, totaling approximately $200 billion. So a lot of organizations and businesses have really relied on this lending program to have access to some working capital to help get them through the pandemic. Almost 5.8 million grant advances were issued, totaling the maximum amount that was originally authorized in the CARES Act, which was the stimulus bill signed into law over a year ago now, March 27th of 2020. So those 5.8 million grants were issued last year in 2020. That $20 billion lasted through, I believe it was summer of 2020 that grant funding ran out. As part of the American Rescue Plan Act that was signed into law almost a month ago now, time's just flying, March 11th, the American Rescue Plan Act was signed into law, and it authorized an additional $15 billion to the EIDL Targeted Grant Advance Program. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, who is eligible and what you need to do and where you can go to find out more information. So there are two components to the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. There are the loans, and then there were also the grants. So just a brief background on the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. This is not a new program. This is a program that has existed for many years, and it is in place and run and managed by the SBA, the Small Business Administration. And it is a loan program that is intended for use by businesses that have been impacted by federally declared disasters. So typically when we think of things like this, we think of oftentimes natural disasters, something like a hurricane or a tornado hits. And if it's declared a federally declared disaster area, those businesses that were impacted can then apply for an economic injury disaster loan. With the COVID-19 pandemic, a federally declared disaster was issued for the entire country, which meant that this program was opened up to all eligible applicants across the country. This is what made it possible for many businesses and organizations to apply for this program. In addition, it also opened up eligibility to organizations that are not typically eligible to receive grants or loans through the SBA. Namely, nonprofits are typically not considered a small business and are not eligible for SBA funding. However, with the COVID-19 pandemic, nonprofits, faith-based organizations, those types of organizations were allowed to apply for these programs. So again, we're talking loans and we're also talking grants. So two different things, two different components. The loan is a 30-year term loan. There is no forgiven amount. So this is very different from the PPP program in that there is no way to apply for forgiveness. There is no way to get any of the loan forgiven. If you take an EIDL loan, you will have to repay it. The interest rates are 2.75% for nonprofits and 3.75% for for-profits. If you choose to prepay any amount on the loan, there are no prepayment penalties or fees, and payments are automatically deferred for 1 year. You can begin making payments at any time, but just know that they aren't due for a minimum of 1 year from the date that you take out the loan. The grant program was just that. It was a grant, so you do not need to repay any grant amount received. As I noted on the last slide, the original $20 billion that was issued as part of the CARES Act has all been expended. So there is not currently an open application process for the grant. That has been closed since approximately summer of last year. Another important item to mention that has changed over the course of this year: if you did receive an EIDL grant advance, it does not reduce your PPP loan forgiveness. So just keep that in mind. That was a change made with the Economic Aid Act, which was signed into law on December 27th. So things have changed a little bit. So these are the two components of EIDL that we're going to be talking about today. So let's start with the EIDL loans. So as I noted, they are available to small businesses, which include agricultural businesses, cooperatives, and nonprofit organizations. To apply for an EIDL loan, you go directly to the SBA.gov website. This is not a loan that you get through a bank or a lender. You need to go directly to SBA.gov and navigate out to the EIDL page, and you'll be able to apply. I have a screenshot coming up so you can make sure that you go to the right place. The deadline to apply for an EIDL loan has been extended to December 31st of this year. So you still have quite a bit of time to assess if you actually need to apply for an EIDL loan. And then this is new as of March 24th of this year. Loans approved starting this week, so April 6th, may be up to $500,000. So initially, when this program rolled out in April of 2020, loans were technically allowed up to $2 million. That changed without much notice to $150,000. So it changed quite drastically. So loans were being approved for up to $150,000. As of this week, loans will be approved up to a maximum of $500,000. You don't need to accept $500,000, but it is possible that you can get a loan up to that amount. These loans can be used for anything related to working capital and normal operating expenses. Things like purchasing real estate, lending money to other people or organizations, investments. Those are ineligible expenses. Those are the types of things that you will not be able to use these funds for. I believe owner distributions are another item. The EIDL loan paperwork comes with a substantial amount of information that you'll want to make sure you read through when you receive the loan document, as there are a few additional items that you can't use these funds for. However, as a reminder, this is very different from the PPP program in that you aren't going to be submitting documentation for what you spent the money on. You will just begin making payments on the loan when the payments come due. But again, all of these loans can always be subject to some level of review or audit by the SBA. So you want to make sure that you're staying in compliance with the loans. So as a reminder, you cannot use these funds for expenses that are covered by other disaster assistance you received. So if you are contemplating whether or not you should be applying for an EIDL loan, think about whether or not you've received other money. Are you intending to apply for a shuttered venue operator grant? Are you a restaurant and you may be applying for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund? Did you get PPP money? Did you receive the employee retention credit? The amount of funding and credits and lending that has been made available over this last year is fairly extensive. And you need to be careful that you're not taking all this money in and using them for quote unquote the same purposes. You need to be careful that you are applying for money that you need due to economic uncertainty and that you have an actual viable use for those funds that isn't already covered by other disaster assistance that you've received. The SBA.gov website has a really great page about the cross eligibility and cross use of funds that you've received from some of the different programs that have come out over the last year from the stimulus packages. So please make sure to check that out as well. So how are you eligible for a loan? Many people have stayed away from the EIDL loan process if they were able to secure a PPP loan, or if they received other funding, maybe from the state or local that was passed through from the federal government. So maybe you're still struggling a little bit, or maybe you're seeing some light at the end of the road, at the end of the tunnel, but you want a little bit of help to get you over, to help push you through. You're eligible for an EIDL loan, essentially if you have 500 or fewer employees. That's kind of the main SBA size standard that you need to be able to fit under. Again, prior to the pandemic, private nonprofits and faith-based organizations would not typically be eligible for SBA loan programs. But since last year, they have allowed nonprofits and faith-based organizations to be eligible for all of these programs. If you're a sole proprietor or an independent contractor, you are also eligible for this loan. And those that are ineligible it's pretty specific. They include those engaged in illegal activities, loan packaging, speculation, multi-level sales distribution, gambling, investing, and lending. You are not eligible for an EIDL loan if you fall into any of those categories. And of course, if you do not meet the SBA small business size standards. So if you have more than 500 employees, if you're a business that's not located in the United States, you're also not eligible. So those are things to keep in mind. So most businesses and organizations, as long as you meet that size standard, it is very likely that you will be eligible to apply for a loan. So the application process is quite simple. It's a streamlined information request. You'll receive a follow-up from an email address. Make sure that you're paying close attention to the email address that you receive an email from. All email communication should come from an email address that ends in @sba.gov. Please make sure that you're taking a look at that before you click on any links or send any information to anybody. You don't want to be caught sending information to something that's a scam. So just make sure that you're double checking that email address. You can accept up to the maximum amount of the loan that is offered to you. An important note, if you have applied and you have not heard anything, perhaps the email that you received went to your spam folder and you didn't see it, or you legitimately haven't gotten any response, it's important to note that you should not reapply. Duplicate applications will cause additional delays in processing. So do not reapply if you haven't heard anything, even if you believed that you originally applied for the loan. You'll want to contact SBA customer service, and I've listed here the phone number and the email address that you can use to contact that customer service line. I have heard good things that they are responsive, even if you have to leave a message or you have to send an email. You should get a response, and they'll be able to let you know either if they didn't receive your application and let you know if you should apply again, or they'll be able to tell you what status your application is in. So this is what the page looks like when you go to apply. So you'll see this apply here button on the EIDL.sba.gov webpage. You'll click apply here and it'll take you to this landing page. So you'll see here the streamlined process requirements. I will tell you, over the last year, I believe this is the third iteration of the loan application portal. So they streamlined it substantially. So most of what you'll need to submit at the front end is going to be somewhat minimal. There may be a few reports that you need to send. A tax return would be one. A form 4506-T is another. The form 4506-T, if you've applied for other lending or credit or grant programs, you may be familiar with what that form is. Essentially, it's a form that allows the funder to request tax information from the IRS on your behalf. So they may not ask you for a tax return. They may just ask you for a form 4506-T so that they can go to the IRS and request that information on your behalf. So these are some of the basics. You'll need to make some certifications in the disclosure section. You'll need your business information, so address, name, tax ID number. You'll need business owner information for all owners that own more than 20% of the business. You will need to ensure that you have accounted for at least 81% of the ownership in supplying the business owner information. So if you are, for example, a cooperative and you have a lot of owners, all of which have less than 20% ownership interest, you are still going to need to input business owner information because they are requiring that you substantiate at least 81% of the business owner's information. So just keep that in mind. Some of the additional information, as I noted, may be a tax return or the Form 4506T. Then you'll be able to review the summary and submit the application. I have included a link here on the slide that will take you directly to this landing page where you can begin the process. The process to apply initially shouldn't take you more than 10 or 15 minutes, so it's quite streamlined. Once you submit the application, you will be contacted, as I noted, and they may request additional information from you. So they may request financial statements, bank statements. Just again, remember to check where that email is coming from so that you don't unknowingly send information to somebody that you shouldn't be. So what about increases? Let's say you received an approved loan of $150,000 last year, but you only accepted $50,000 of it. Now it's April of 2021 and you aren't quite where you wanted to be. And so you'd like to take out some more money. You are able to do that, and you actually have been able to do that. So applicants have up to 2 years after the date of the loan to request additional funds. As of March 24th, when they announced that the loans would be up to a maximum of $500,000, the SBA actually began reaching out directly to previous loan recipients who did not accept the maximum amount of the loan. So if you received an email like that, it's not spam. They did intentionally send that out to let you know that the maximum loan amount has now potentially gone up to $500,000 and you can request an increase. And again, you have up to 2 years after the date of the loan to request additional funds. Let's say you received a loan maybe in August of last year, and now you want to, you're still good with the loan that you have. You have the application to apply for an EIDL loan. The due date is December 31st of this year. But again, you have 2 years from the date that you got the loan to request additional funds. So you are able to, even after December 31st of this year, if next year things just aren't quite where you need them to be, you will still have the opportunity to request an increase. Important items to be aware of: collateral is required for any loan over $25,000. So again, you may be offered a loan of $500,000. Perhaps you don't have any collateral to put up. So you can take out a loan of $25,000 and no collateral will be required. And in addition, a personal guarantee is required for loans over $200,000. So perhaps you have the collateral, but you don't have any owners that want to actually personally guarantee. So you can take $200,000, pledge that collateral, and not have to deal with a personal guarantee. So again, you do not have to take the maximum loan amount. If you are offered $500,000, but really just need $5,000, you can do that. And you know that that additional amount is there if you need it for the next 2 years. So now let's talk a little bit about the targeted EIDL grant advances. So this is different than the loan, and this is different than the initial EIDL advances that were issued last year. As I mentioned at the beginning, the initial $20 billion that was issued by the CARES Act for the EIDL advance program, that money is gone. It was gone sometime last summer. And so what they've done as part of the Economic Aid Act, they established this program, and the American Rescue Plan Act added an additional $15 billion to this program, is that they decided to do a targeted approach as opposed to having an open grant portal for people to apply to. So again, there is no open application process. I'll state that again because we continue to get some questions about this. There is no open application process right now for the EIDL advances. This is a targeted program. So the SBA will be contacting those that are eligible directly and providing application instructions for those that are eligible. So you cannot go to the SBA.gov website and apply anywhere on that website for these funds. Keep an eye on your email. If you received an email from somebody at SBA.gov, make sure you're looking at it and reviewing what that email is, because it may be related to an increase in an EIDL loan, or it may be it may be information related to the targeted EIDL grant advance program. The SBA did begin sending out emails in early February. So again, if you think you should have been in one of the priority groups and you haven't received an email yet, you can go back, check your email. But I have also listed here again the SBA's Customer Service Center telephone number. And the targeted EIDL advance does have a different email address if you prefer to send an email versus making a phone call. So you can send an email and ask a question. You think that you should have been in one of the priority groups and you haven't gotten an email, you can check the status. There are 2 priority groups for the targeted EIDL advance program. Again, for this first priority group, the likelihood is that you should have received an email already if you fell into this first group. The first group included those that received an EIDL advance last year, but received less than $10,000. If you remember the program from last year, the advance was for a grant of up to $1,000 per employee, up to a maximum of $10,000. So the most money you could get is $10,000, but the least amount that you could get is $1,000. So this first priority group is for anybody that got less than $10,000. Essentially, they're going to true it up for you. The second priority group includes those that applied for the economic injury disaster loan advance before December 27th, but didn't receive the funds because that funding ran out. So essentially that's going to be anybody that may have applied for an EIDL loan, as applying for the grant was part of the loan application process. If you applied for a loan sometime between summer of last year and December 27th of last year, you may fall into the second priority group. If you receive this email, that doesn't mean that you are automatically eligible for this targeted EIDL advance. So there are some eligibility requirements. You actually have to have 300 or fewer employees. So if you recall, that's different than the 500 employees that qualify you to be eligible for SBA funding. So again, this is if you receive an email follow-up from the SBA about the targeted EIDL advance, there are still eligibility requirements you have to meet to be able to receive this additional funding. You won't automatically receive it. So first is you have to have 300 or fewer employees. You have to be located in a federally identified low-income community. This is a link, that federally identified low-income community. You can, once you receive the PowerPoint slides, you should be able to click on that link. It is also a link that's available through the SBA.gov website to allow you to determine if you are located in one of those low-income communities. And the third step is that you have to demonstrate a reduction in revenue of more than 30% during an 8-week period beginning on March 2020 or later. So there are, again, a few eligibility requirements. You will not just be able to automatically qualify because you received an email from the SBA. You will need to produce documents, send them in. And my understanding is that it's about a 3-week turnaround time. Once you submit all of the documentation needed and prove that you meet the eligibility requirements, you should have the remainder of that advance. Those funds should be in your bank account in about 21 days. Again, remember, you will likely need your 2019 federal tax return. If for some reason you have not yet filed your 2019 federal tax return, you're going to want to get it filed ASAP. It does appear that that's going to be a requirement to be able to receive this targeted EIDL advance. You will also need to provide monthly gross receipts for each month from all the way back in January 2019 through the most recent month to date period. So you can make sure in advance, again, if you think you may be eligible for this but haven't yet received communication, you can be prepared and ready to go for when these document requests comes in. So there is potential for some additional funding as part of the targeted EIDL advance program if funds remain after the initial target program. So we've got that first priority group and the second priority group. If there are still funds remaining $5,000 supplemental grants may be issued to organizations who suffered a revenue loss of at least 50% and have 10 or fewer employees. So it will be much, much, much more targeted than even the initial targeted advanced program. We don't have any more information on this. Expect more information to come if they do determine that there are supplemental funds available once they get through the first two priority groups. As a reminder, EIDL advances are quote unquote, I have to always put in quotes. We are a firm of tax accountants and auditors, so I can't just say anything is tax-free, but for federal purposes, EIDL advances are tax exempt income. So you will not pay, again, at the federal level, you will not pay tax on EIDL advances that you receive. It may be different based on the state or states that you file in. If you've been keeping an eye on the news, you'll know that we're still a little bit in a tizzy over all of the different rules for states for all the different types of funding, but for federal purposes, EIDL advances will be tax-free. And with that, we've got some links to resources. Again, the SBA.gov website is a wealth of information. If you haven't gone to that website, I highly, highly recommend that you go to the website, peruse the different pages that they have. There's a wealth of information there, frequently asked questions for all of the different lending programs. There are also links to all of the program data to date. And of course, keep an eye on our COVID-19 Resource Center, where we try to keep you up to date with blogs and our webinar postings. Melody, any questions for today?
Yeah, a couple. If a nonprofit obtains a loan that's more than $200,000, is the personal guarantee required?
It is for all loans over $200,000, regardless of what type of organization you are, yes.
Okay. And then the second one, I'm not sure if it's beyond the scope, if you want to answer now or
Sure.
later, but I'll give it to you. What if you have an EIDL loan and the shareholder took out distributions that are against the EIDL rules and they don't have the cash to put the money back in?
That's a good question. I think you'll probably need to keep good documentation. If there was a specific reason that EIDL funds were used for those owner distributions, you'll want to document that. There's a difference between actual distributions, so distributions of profits versus, let's say, an owner maybe paid for some expenses due to the pandemic. If revenues were down and the owner needed to put some money in, that's different. Those wouldn't be considered distributions. I would say feel free to follow up with me after and we can talk about it maybe in a little more depth, but it may be the way that those distributions were structured need to be looked at. But there's probably some analysis that you may need to do based on the payments that were made.
Thank you. And this one, I'm not sure. I did put a question back to the person who asked the question because they may be a religious or a nonprofit that's not eligible. But the question was, if we do not file taxes and are tax exempt, what do we do? My guess would be that they're not eligible.
That is going to be likely, considering that they did make it, it's quite a substantial part of the literature and the frequently asked questions that a 2019 tax return will be required, and it may make you ineligible for the loan or for the advance if you don't have a tax return filed.
That's all our questions. Thank you for all your help.
Great, absolutely.
Thank you, Kate and Melody, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Keep an eye out in your email a little bit later today for that recording and the PowerPoint slides headed your way. And as always, stay tuned for future webinars coming your way. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank
you.